Hello everyone, and I hope you are doing very well wherever you are. So let's dive straight into Bava Kamma Daf 79 Amud B. So just continue from the last Daf. From the last Amud. The Gemara asks, when speaking, the Braita speaks of rental, is referring to rental of what kind of property? If we say it's speaking of the rental of movable property, is movable property subject to the writing of a deed? Rather, Rav Chisda said it's referring to the rental of land. So you see the footnotes here. A deed of sale is not one of the ways through which movable property is acquired. The transfer of a deed is entirely ineffectual as a method of acquisition with regard to movable property. Shechirus de karka, rental of land. Just as land is purchased by means of money through the writing of a deed or by taking possession, so too a rental agreement is finalized by means of money through the writing a deed or by taking possession. And that's the Roman say for Kinin Hilchot Mechiva 118 Shulchan Aruch Shemitah 195:9 315:1. Rabbi Elazar says, if people saw a thief who was hiding in the woods, Uhu Shehitmin B'choroshin, in a case where a herd is grazing in a forest, if someone strikes one of the animals to move it over to a hidden place between trees, he is liable to pay the double payment of a thief. If he subsequently slaughtered or sold it, he is liable to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. Rambam say from Nazir and Hilchot Geneva 217 Torah Choshemit 350, near a herd of grazing animals, and that individual emerged and slaughtered or sold one of the animals from the herd, he pays the fourfold or fivefold payment. The Gemara asks, why is he liable to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment, but he did not pull the animal? Rabbi Elazar is apparently describing a case where the thief emerged from the forest and slaughtered one of the animals without first moving it, and there's no fourfold or fivefold payment unless the thief first steals the animal. Rav Chisda says he's referring to a case where he hit the animal with a stick, causing it to move. With regard to Rabbi Elazar's statement, the sages say, but since people saw him doing all this, he is a robber, not a thief, and the fourfold or fivefold payment applies only to thieves. A thief is one who sneaks into a house or other private property. One who commits this act brazenly in public is classified as a robber. The Gemara answers, since he was hiding from them, he is considered a thief, despite the fact that they saw him. The Gemara asks, but if so, what are the circumstances of a robber? A thief is defined as one who takes another person's possession stealthily, without his knowledge, even in a case where the owner is aware that his money is being stolen. If the perpetrator does not act in public, but waits in hiding, he is called a thief. Robber is defined as one who takes another's possession by force. Examples of robbery include grabbing money from another's hand, entering another's property uninvited and taking property from there, taking animals or servants by force and using them for one's own purposes, and entering the field of another and eating his produce. Rambam Sefer Nazir and Hilchot Geneva 1:3, Hilchot Gezela Vaveda 1:3, and Nachem Mishnah there, Shulchan Aruch Shemitah 348:3, 359:7, and the Bava Kamma there. Rabbi Abahu said, robbers are like the case of Benir ben Yehoiada. It is stated concerning him, he slew an Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but he went down to him with a staff, and he robbed the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his own spear. 2 Samuel 23:21. Rabbi Yochanan said, a different example of a robber is a case like that of the man of Shechem. As it is said, and the men of Shechem set ambushes for him on the top of the mountains, and they robbed all that came along that way by them. Judges 9:25. The Gemara asks, and what is the reason of Rabbi Abba who did not say the example from this verse, which discusses the men of Shechem? He could have said to you, since the men of Shechem are hiding in ambush, they are not considered robbers but thieves. The commentators wonder how is it possible to assert the men of Shechem were not robbers, when the verse in Judges 9:25 explicitly states, and they robbed all that came along, to derive it. Some explain that since they took money by force, an act that resembles robbery externally, the verse refers to this as robbing. Nevertheless, since they lay hidden in ambush, the halacha categorizes them as thieves, A similar claim appears elsewhere in the Gemara in 57a with regard to an armed bandit who hides as he lies in wait to his chaim. But how would Rabbi Yochanan respond to this claim? This fact that they were hiding was not because they were hesitant to steal in view of the public, but they acted in this manner so that travelers should not see them in advance and flee from them. The Gemara concludes its discussion of theft with several agadic statements. His students asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, for what reason was the Torah stricter with a thief than with a robber? Only a thief is required to pay the double fourfold or fivefold payment, not a robber. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them in response, this one the robber equates the honor of the servant to the honor of his master, and that one the thief did not equate honor of the servant to the honor of his master. The robber fears neither God nor people, as he is not afraid to rob in public. The thief does not fear God, but he does fear other people, which demonstrates that he is more concerned about humans than God. As it were, the thief establishes the eye below, i.e. God's eye, as though it does not see, and the ear below, i.e. God's ear, as though it does not hear. The Gemara cites different verses that describe people who imagine that God does not see their actions, as it is stated, woe to them who seek deeply to hide their counsel from the Lord, and their works are in the dark. And they say, who sees us and who knows that? Isaiah 29:15, as it is written, and they say the Lord will not see, neither will the God of Jacob give heed, in Psalms 94:7. And it is written, for they see the Lord has forsaken the land, and the Lord did not see it. Ezekiel 9:9, as is taught in the Braita, Rabbi Meir said, this is the severity of a thief, of a robber. And per Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's explanation, they say a parable named Rabban Gamliel. To what is this matter comparable? To two people who were living in the same city, and both of them prepared a feast. One of them invited the people of the city to his feast, but he did not invite the king's sons, and the other did not invite the people of the city, but also did not invite the king's sons, which of them deserves greater punishment. You must say that it's the one who invited the people of the city, but did not invite the king's sons. Likewise, both the thief and the robber show disdain for God, but the robber does not display more respect for people. The Gemara discusses why there is a fourfold payment for a sheep, but a fivefold payment for an ox. Rabbi Meir said, come and see how great the power of labor is. The theft of an ox, which was forced by the thief to cease its labor, leads to a fivefold payment, whereas the theft of a sheep was not forced by the thief to cease its labor, as the sheep performs no labor, leads only to a fourfold payment. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, come and see how great human dignity is. The theft of an ox, which walked on its own legs as the thief stole it, leads to a fivefold payment. Or the theft of a sheep, which the thief carried on his shoulder as he walked, thereby causes himself embarrassment, leads only to a fourfold payment. The Mishnah, one may not raise domesticated animals. So what does that mean? Behema daka, small domesticated animals. The term small domesticated animals refers to sheep and goats. They cause great environmental damage to forested areas, eating up all of soft vegetation. They can even destroy entire forests, leading to extensive soil depletion. Since the location in question is Eretz Yisrael, where settlement constitutes a mitzvah, and there is not an abundance of natural grassland, there is ample reason to prohibit raising these animals there. Rashi means that small animals tend to wander off with or without the shepherd's knowledge and graze on other people's land, thereby damaging their crops. Although this concern applies outside of Eretz Yisrael as well, the sages did not impose their decree there. Rather, they left it up to the injured party, in such cases, to sue the offender for damages. By contrast, in Eretz Yisrael, the sages wanted to avoid any damage to agricultural fields in order to bolster and enhance the settlement of the land. Others explain this distinction differently. Because most fields in Eretz Yisrael are owned by Jews, the sages decreed that extra precautions should be taken to avoid damaging the fields. There is a halachic difference between these two interpretations. According to the first explanation, it refers to the settlement of Eretz Yisrael. The prohibition applies even in times and places where the land is owned by Gentiles. Tafto Vafera. By contrast, according to the second explanation, the prohibition does not apply unless the land is owned by Jews. See the Torah. Sheep and goats in settled areas of Eretz Yisrael. I didn't read this bit. The sage prohibited raising small domesticated animals in Eretz Yisrael, even in one's house. This prohibition applies in areas where there are fields and vineyards. In regions where there are enforced wilderness, it is permitted. In Syria, one may raise domesticated animals in all locations, despite the fact that with regard to many halachot, Syria is treated like Eretz Yisrael. Mama Sefer Nazich and Hilchon Nizki, Mammon 5.2, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mitzvot 409.1, Sipat Hashulchan 147, as they graze on other people's crops. But one may raise them in Syria, despite the fact that with regard to many other halachot, Syria is treated like Eretz Yisrael, and in the wilderness of Eretz Yisrael. Midbar is wilderness. The wilderness of Midbar in both biblical and missionary Hebrew does not refer to an entirely desolate region where nothing grows, but to an area that is uninhabited due to sparse rainfall, lack of water supply, and other reasons. A wilderness of this kind has vegetation that is suitable for grazing, especially for sheep and goats. There are several such areas in Eretz Yisrael that are full of greenery during the rainy season and for a short while thereafter, which serve as grazing land. The root of the word midbar, which is dalet bei reish, can refer to leading animals for grazing. One may not raise chickens in Jerusalem. One may not raise chickens in Jerusalem due to the abundance of sacrificial food found there. Likewise, priests may not raise chickens anywhere in Eretz Yisrael because of the sacred foods they eat. They must be kept ritually pure. 7:14, because of the many foods of the priest's possession that must be kept ritually pure, e.g. truma. Furthermore, one may not raise pigs. Ein megadlin chazirin, Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah states that the prohibition applies equally to all non-kosher animals. Pigs are mentioned specifically only because this is the most common case. The Mishnah Shavit 7.3 teaches that it's prohibited to engage in business dealings that involve any non-kosher animal. Other commentators claim that the rabbinic ordinance against raising pigs, in addition to the general prohibition against business dealings involving non-kosher animals, is the Meiri. Alternatively, the general prohibition against dealing in non-kosher animals applies only when they are sold for food, not if they are being raised for their pelts or other byproducts. In the case of pigs, the sage prohibited to raise them even if the purposes are related to food. Rabbeinu Tam, Tosfos on 82b, see the Jerusalem Talmud. By rabbinic law, it is prohibited to raise pigs anywhere even in order to use their fat for greasing hides, and all the more so for trade. Rambam Sefer Nazich and Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 5.9 Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mitzvot 409.2. And just a footnote I didn't read before, Kohen and Eretz Yisrael, priests in Eretz Yisrael, priests possess teruma which they must safeguard against ritual contamination. Therefore, it's prohibited for them to raise chickens, which might peck on an item that can impart ritual impurity and thereby bring it into contact with the teruma. The Mishnah applies this prohibition only to priests, although there are also non-priests in Eretz Yisrael who voluntarily followed strictures of teruma and kept all the food in a state of ritual purity. The sages did not impose their ordinance on these individuals, because even if their food did become contaminated, this would not be considered a transgression, says the Meiri. Anyway, and a person may not raise a dog unless it is tied with chains. One may not raise a dog unless it is restrained by a chain, as per the Gemara 83b, Rambam Sefer Nazich and Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 5.9 Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mitzvot 409.3. One may spread out traps, nishovim. The source of this word is apparently Aramaic nishpa, a net. Here, the term refers to nets spread out by trappers, typically to catch birds, but occasionally for larger animals as well. By rabbinic law, it is prohibited to trap pigeons in an inhabited area. One may not lay out traps for pigeons unless he distances himself 4 miles from inhabited areas. See 83a, Rambam Sefer Nazich and Hilchot Nizkei Mammon 6.8 Choshen Mitzvot 370. For pigeons only if it was performed at a distance of at least 30 ris, which is 8,000 cubits, from any settled area, to ensure that privately owned pigeons are not caught in the traps. The sages taught in a Braita, one may not raise small domesticated animals, i.e. sheep and goats, in settled areas of Eretz Yisrael. One may raise them in forests in Eretz Yisrael. In Syria, it is permitted to do so even in a settled area, and in Tizay, it is permitted to do so outside of Eretz Yisrael. It is taught in another Braita that one may not raise small domesticated animals in settled areas of Eretz Yisrael, One may raise him in the wilderness, that is Judea. Midbar Shebehuda. This refers to the area spreading from the eastern slopes of Jerusalem all the way down to the Dead Sea. This area was used for grazing flocks since the days of King David. And in the wilderness, that is on the border near Akko. There are several variant readings of the name of this place, such as the wilderness of the village of Amico. The reference is apparently to some of the areas of the Vudum Valley, which are not so suited for ordinary agricultural activity, but do have extensive vegetative growth during the rainy season. And even though the sages said that one may not raise domesticated animals, nevertheless, one may raise domesticated animals, i.e. cattle, because the sages issue a decree upon the public only. The court may not raise a decree for the public unless the majority can abide by it. And Sefer Shoftim Hilchot Mamim 2.5, Sefer Zimonim Hilchot Tanis 1.5. If the majority of the public is able to abide by it. This difference is that it is possible for someone to bring domesticated animals from outside of Eretz Yisrael in the event that they are needed. But it is not possible for someone to bring large domesticated animals from outside of Eretz Yisrael whenever he needs one, since there is a constant need for them as beasts and of burden. Therefore the sages do not issue a decree with regard to these types of animals. The Bible continues, and even they said that one may not raise small domesticated animals. However, one may keep these animals on his premises for 30 days before a pilgrimage festival, and 30 days before the wedding feast of one's son, when many animals are needed for food, provided he does not leave the last one, i.e. the animal which he purchased immediately before the festival, for 30 days. The more clarifies the final line of the Braita. The Braita needs to state that this ruling, as it might enter your mind to say that if the pilgrimage festival has passed, 30 days have not yet elapsed from the time when he bought the animal until now, he may keep the animal until 30 days have elapsed. The counter to Braita teaches that we do not say it's permitted to keep it for a total of 30 days. Rather, once the pilgrimage festival has passed, you should not keep it any longer. Thank you for listening and I wish you all the best. Bye.